Welcome back to Modular Railroading. In today's video, I'll show you how to weather an N-scale GB20 with oils and acrylics. For this project, I'm using prototype pictures for reference. I've linked a couple of them in the description below. Before I start, I remove the shell from the mechanism and also remove the walkway section from the body by gently twisting it away. Then I proceed to mask all parts that need to stay fairly clean, like the windows, number boards and the beacon. For the windows and the number boards, I use micromask liquid masking. I simply paint the micromask on the windows to cover them up completely. Sometimes it's necessary to repeat the process, but it's pretty easy to do overall. To keep the beacon clean, I use Tamiya 6mm masking tape. I find the easiest way to cut the tape to size is to just stick it to the cutting mat first and then cut out a piece using a sharp knife. The lifelike GB20s run nicely, but lag a bit when it comes to the handrails, so I'll paint the handrail ends in white using Tamiya XF2 flat white. I'm trying to paint a very thin layer, and I'm okay with the paint not fully covering the handrails everywhere to achieve that. This particular engine had two stanchions painted yellow. I think this is a nice touch and adds some variety to the fleet, so I'm painting the stanchions using Tamiya flat yellow XF3. I found just one picture of this engine, so I'll assume that the stanchions were painted yellow on both sides and also that they were painted yellow on the outside only. I paint the tread plates, which are molded with the green handrail parts black as well, to hide the fact that everything is the same part. The paint I'm using for this is Tamiya XF1 flat black. Another thing I noticed is that on this engine the CB&Q Chinese red is showing through on the walkways at the long hood. To replicate this, I use Tamiya flat red XF7 and a small sponge from Pan Pastels. I dip the sponge in the red paint and then dab off the excess paint before I dab the walkways. I want the application to be a little bit imperfect and irregular, to simulate the effect of the underlying red paint showing through the black on top. I let the paint dry overnight before starting with the oils. The first step is a fading wash of titanium white. I apply the wash everywhere, making sure that I don't forget any surfaces of the locomotive body. After that, I pick up the excess with a brush loaded with a bit of thinner and even out the effect with vertical brush strokes. When working on the roof around all the vents, a deerfoot brush works nicely to create a slightly random pattern and avoid obvious brush marks. I reassemble the body and walkway to make sure that the effect is even overall and make some corrections to blend the weathering of both parts together. I let this layer dry for about 2 hours and then seal it using matte varnish. The second layer is a wash of warm grey. I apply it the same way as the fading wash. I need to work from the walkway upwards, however, since the handrails are in the way now. That's not a problem as long as I maintain the vertical pattern. To simulate the dirt on the walkways, I dab a stronger wash there. Since the pilots tend to catch a lot of dirt, I apply the paint somewhat thinned. The mix is almost a wash but doesn't flow yet and sticks without retreating into the corners too much. It's also important to remember that handrails get dirty too. It's a bit difficult to get to the inside, but the application doesn't need to be perfect as long as the bright factory paint gets toned down enough. When working around the vents on the roof, it's time to use the deerfoot brush again. When I'm done with the roof, I do a bit of touching up on the sides and then put some more dirt around the vents. This time I also used the wash on the trucks and the fuel tank. I try to not use too much of the wash to keep it from creeping into the gearing or on the pickups. After another 2 hours of drying time, I seal everything again with matte varnish. In the pictures I have found, the engine has a mostly greyish dirty look to it, so I will skip the wash of burnt umber that I usually apply in the third step and continue with black chalk instead. I shave off some of the chalk onto a piece of paper and then apply it using a brush. I cut the bristles of an old brush short in order to create a brush that has fine but still somewhat stiff bristles to work the chalk into the details of the shell. To do so, I push the brush into the chalk to pick up some of the powder and then push it into the vents and onto the roof. If some of the powder falls onto surfaces where it shouldn't be, it's best to just blow the excess off of the model instead of trying to wipe it away. While working on the roof vents and the exhaust stack, I make sure to really push the chalk into them to cover the fading effect and create a nice contrast. I find doing so also brings out the fan details very nicely. After working the black chalk into all of the vents, I apply some of it on the trucks as well. After sealing the chalk with another layer of matte varnish, it's time to remove the masking again. I use a toothpick to carefully pick at the dried masking film and either pull it off with tweezers or scratch it off the windows when I don't manage to lift the film in one corner. I try to not push too hard because with some models it's possible to dislodge the window glazing and push it into the cap. To remove the masking over the number boards, it's best to dull the tip a bit to avoid scratching the paint on the number boards. So that's how you create some basic weathering on your locomotives. Here's the shot of the engine on the layout. Let me know in the comments if this tutorial was helpful to you or if you have any questions.